The sound reached me before I even looked up. That unmistakable whoop of a squad car siren. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. The sunlight streamed in at an angle through the blinds. For a second, I stayed frozen in place, as if the sound might pass by like any other routed emergency. But then came the crunch of tires on the gravel out front. Something in me knew, without even needing to look, that they were here for me. I walked slowly to the window, careful not to slosh my coffee, and pulled the blinds just enough to see the street. 2 squad cars, parked side by side in a V formation across the mouth of my own driveway. Lights spinning quietly, bathing the front of the house in a surreal red and blue glow. My truck, an aging but well-kept red Dodge Ram, sat exactly where it had been for the past 4 weeks. Nose forward on the right-hand side of the driveway, just behind a faded basketball hoop that hadn't seen a game since my brother was alive. Across the street, standing at the edge of her perfect lawn in her perfect lavender windbreaker, was Karen. Not a Karen. The Karen. Her arms were crossed in a stance so precise, so choreographed, it looked like it had been rehearsed in the mirror for days. One hand clutched her HOA-issued clipboard, the other perched stiffly beneath her elbow. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Her posture, that smug little tilt of her chin, said it all. I warned you. 2 officers stepped out of the car. One older, already thumbing a notepad. The younger one, tall and fresh-faced, lingered near the back of the vehicle, scanning the house like he expected trouble. I stood there for one long, silent minute, letting the coffee warm my palm, letting the scene sink in, and trying not to let the rising tide of annoyance break the surface of my calm. Then I set the mug down, walked to the front door, and opened it before they could knock. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice smooth, level, and polite, because I had already learned that in neighborhoods like this, it's the calm ones they underestimate. The older officer cleared his throat and glanced down at his pad. "Sir, we received a report of a suspicious vehicle parked improperly on this property. Are you the homeowner?" I almost smiled but didn't. Instead, I nodded and stepped fully into the doorway, arms at my side, relaxed. "I am. My name is Nathan Cole. I live here." The young officer took a small step forward. "Do you have proof of residence? ID, lease, anything showing ownership?" I didn't blame them. They were doing their job. But it was impossible to miss the faint look of apology in the older one's eyes, because deep down, even he probably knew this wasn't really about the truck. I didn't move yet. I let the silence hang, just long enough to register that Karen was still watching, still enjoying the show. "What's the issue with the vehicle?" I asked. "It's my truck. It's been parked in the driveway since I moved in last month." "We received a complaint," the older officer said, scratching his neck, that the vehicle might be abandoned or possibly not owned by the resident. "Tag didn't come up registered to this address." "Because it belonged to my brother," I said quietly. "He passed away last year. I inherited the house and the truck. Been taking care of both." That made the young one glance toward the driveway again. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said automatically, but not unkindly. I nodded. "Give me a moment. I'll get the paperwork." Inside, I moved calmly, not because I wasn't irritated, but because I had long ago trained myself not to show it. People like Karen didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing me riled. I reached into the drawer where I kept the property documents, thumbed through the folder until I found the deed transfer, the probate letters, and the vehicle registration. I even grabbed the veteran status card I never usually showed anyone, just in case. When I returned, they took the papers respectfully. The older one leafed through them with the practiced eye of someone who'd had to verify dozens of these. The younger officer, for the first time, looked just slightly uncomfortable. "Everything appears to be in order," the older cop said after a moment, lowering the documents. "You're within your rights to park your truck there. It's your property." "Good to know," I said. I reached out and took the paperwork back. "Then I assume there's no further issue?" "No, sir. But, he hesitated, glanced across the street. "The reporting party believed there was a possible trespasser situation. Said the house has been vacant, and they weren't informed of a new resident." "That's funny," I said, allowing myself a thin smile, because I hand-delivered notice of ownership change to the HOA office 3 weeks ago. Got the email confirmation too, but I'm guessing Karen forgot to share that. They didn't comment, but I could see it in the flicker behind the older officer's eyes. The weariness of someone who dealt with that type of call before. The kind where an inflated sense of power and an overused clipboard turned into a waste of department time. As the officers walked back to their vehicle, I stayed standing in the doorway. I didn't look at Karen. I didn't need to. The sound of her storming back toward her front door in frustration, muttering something about procedure and standards, told me everything I needed to know. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly suspect, was that this entire encounter had just become part of my growing file. Because I wasn't just some grieving brother who moved into a house with a sentimental truck in the driveway. I had a badge of my own once. And even though I was no longer active, I still knew exactly how to collect evidence, follow paper trails, and file formal complaints that didn't just disappear into silence. She thought this would be the first chapter of a long war of attrition. She was wrong. It was the beginning of the end. The first time I met her, I didn't know what she was. That came later. She knocked on my door 3 days after I moved in. Not with a casserole or a welcome packet, but with a clipboard and a pen, her name written in looping script on a laminated HOA badge clipped to her lavender windbreaker. She smiled the kind of smile that never touched her eyes and introduced herself as Karen Westbrook, the acting president of the Oak Summit Hills Homeowners Association. I had just set down a box of books when I heard the knock. The house still smelled like dust and paint. I hadn't even finished unpacking. When I opened the door, she was already mid-sentence, gesturing toward the truck with her pen like it was a problem she was hoping I would help her erase. I wasn't sure anyone had moved in yet, she said. Saw the truck, of course, but no one registered with the HOA. You are? Nathan Cole, I replied. My brother owned the place. He passed last October. I'm staying here now. Oh, she said, tone changing just enough to acknowledge something she couldn't control. I'm sorry to hear that. We were all quite fond of Stephen. Always so quiet. Followed the rules. She let that last part linger in the air like a challenge. I offered a neutral smile. Yeah, that was Stephen. There was a silence, not long, but long enough, and then she pivoted to the clipboard. Well, we'll need your occupancy forms, vehicle registrations, and confirmation that you've read and agreed to the community standards. I brought you a copy. Everything's in here. She held out a plastic folder with the HOA logo stamped across it in gold leaf. I took it, more out of politeness than anything else, and nodded. Appreciate it. She started to turn, then paused and looked at the truck again. I should mention, we do have a strict parking policy. Vehicles must be parked either in the garage or behind the front line of the home. That one, she pointed, it's technically protruding past the front porch, which is a violation. It's parked in the driveway, I said, puzzled, where it's always been. Understand, she said, as if I didn't. But the enforcement is stricter now. Some neighbors have expressed concern about appearances. We just want to maintain harmony. Harmony. That was a word she liked to use, Karen Westbrook. She would go on to use it in half a dozen emails, in voicemail messages, and once with a straight face during a neighborhood meeting when discussing whether wind chimes were auditory pollution. I thanked her for the packet and closed the door slowly, already feeling the weight of what I'd just stepped into. The truck hadn't moved in years. It was more than a vehicle. It was a piece of my brother, and honestly, a piece of me. We'd rebuilt the transmission together when we were teenagers. That dent in the rear fender? My fault. First time I tried to parallel park it during high school. After my brother's funeral, I'd spent an afternoon just sitting in the cab, running my fingers over the steering wheel, remembering what it sounded like when he used to back it up the driveway while blasting Creedence. I wasn't about to move it because someone didn't like how it looked in a driveway. But I didn't argue. Not yet. Over the next week, the notices started arriving. First, a printed warning slid under my door about vehicle conformity. Then another about yard maintenance, even though the grass was freshly cut. A few days later, a third about unauthorized flag displays, referring to the small Navy flag I'd stuck in the garden bed beneath the porch. Each one was worded the same way. We understand this may be an oversight. We encourage compliance. Failure to respond may result in formal citations. Always ending with a smiley face emoji in the email signature. Like that made it all more palatable. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every email. I began time-stamping photos of the truck from the same angle every morning, just to be safe. I scanned in the HOA rulebook and highlighted every line that contradicted the complaints. I even installed a discreet motion camera above the porch, more for peace of mind than anything else, but a decision that would prove useful. Karen, for her part, escalated slowly, like a frog turning up the heat 1 degree at a time. She never yelled, never cursed. That wasn't her style. She'd walk her tiny white dog past my driveway 3 times a day, peeking at the truck like it was radioactive. Once, she left a note on the windshield that simply read, still protruding, "Red Heart, K." I didn't respond. I didn't move the truck. I didn't take down the flag. Instead, I started to learn the bylaws better than she had. I noticed, for example, that Article 7.3b allowed for driveway parking if the vehicle was licensed, insured, and operational, which mine was. Article 8.2c referenced unsightly vehicles, but only in the context of disrepair or obvious rust, not an old Dodge with fresh paint. The rules were subjective, and she was exploiting the subjectivity. I also discovered something else. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She was the HOA president because no one else wanted to be. Elections were held, technically, but never contested. No one showed up. The board was 3 people: Karen, her friend Dolores who lived on the corner, and some man named Stan who hadn't returned an email in 5 years. They ran the community the way a child might run a dollhouse, by moving everything the way they liked and throwing a tantrum when something didn't match the curtains. The real shift happened on a Tuesday morning. I had just returned from the hardware store, picking up a replacement latch for the side gate, when I noticed my truck had a bright orange sticker on the windshield. Bold, industrial print. Warning: this vehicle is subject to removal under municipal code. It took me 3 seconds to realize what had happened. 5 more to scan my security footage. And there she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize, likely from a private towing company. She didn't touch the truck, but she gestured at it repeatedly, clearly giving some sort of directive. Then they walked away. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was personal. That night, I made a choice. I went through my files, pulled out my old credentials. Not my veteran ID, my other one. From before, when I worked for state code enforcement. Before I took my leave to handle my brother's estate. I hadn't used it in months, but the training, the procedure, the instinct, it was still all there. Karen Westbrook didn't realize she wasn't just picking on a newcomer. She was building a paper trail that pointed back at her. Misuse of authority, targeted harassment, possibly even criminal misrepresentation of municipal law. And I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to expose her. I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing. A calm smile on my face, because Karen thought this was just about a truck. She had no idea what I was about to park on her doorstep. Some people go to war with fists. Others use gossip. Karen used paper. It didn't take long for the campaign to kick into gear. It began with what I now consider the classic Karen trio: a complaint, a citation, and a passive-aggressive newsletter, all within the same week. The complaint arrived first via email. It was a generic message from the HOA inbox, addressed to resident at 113 Sycamore, as though I hadn't already introduced myself to the president in person. The subject line read, "Notice of Community Concern, Non-Compliant Vehicle." It referenced multiple observations of a non-garaged vehicle parked in violation of visual harmony standards. Attached was a poorly lit photo of my red truck, time-stamped at 7:02 a.m., taken from the sidewalk with a tilted phone and a finger half obscuring the lens. I could tell immediately by the angle where the photo had been taken, from across the street, behind a rose bush. Karen's rose bush. I knew because I'd seen her out there before, pruning the stems with the same intensity one might use to defuse a bomb. The next day, a paper citation appeared in my mailbox, official HOA violation, typed in 18-point font like it had been designed to be intimidating. It was signed K. Westbrook, HOA president, and included a $75 fine for non-compliant parking, payable within 10 days or risk escalation. And then, as if to wrap it all up in a neat little bow, The monthly community newsletter was updated. A new section, right below the upcoming gardening club meeting, read, "Let's all do our part to maintain the beauty and order of Oak Summit Hills." That means mowing regularly, keeping trash bins out of sight, and parking our vehicles where they belong, in the garage, not on the driveway like a used car lot. No names, but plenty of pointed fingers. At first, I laughed. Then, I documented. I didn't fight her immediately. That would have been her dream, an email exchange, a screaming match on the sidewalk, anything she could twist into hostile behavior. No, I chose a different path, the quieter one. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know how to collect facts, how to preserve timelines, how to let someone hang themselves with their own rope. I started building a folder on my desktop titled _evidence. Inside were subfolders for emails, letters, photos, audio, and eventually video. That last one, that came courtesy of a $49 motion detecting camera I ordered online and mounted beneath the eave of the front porch, just above the light fixture. It was small, discreet, and aimed perfectly at the driveway. The very next morning after installing it, I caught her. 7:15 a.m. Karen walks across the street with her tiny white dog on a red leash. She stops in front of my truck, pauses, pulls out her phone, snaps 3 pictures. Then she kneels, pretending to tie her shoe, and subtly sticks a Post-it note on the bottom corner of my windshield. It read, still out of line, "HOA action pending." I didn't respond. I simply saved the footage. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-drip faucet of absurdity. One morning, I walked outside to find a neon orange cone placed behind my truck, as if to suggest it was blocking the sidewalk, despite the fact that the sidewalk had a solid 2 feet of clearance. Another time, I found a handwritten warning folded and taped to my mailbox, citing potential oil drips from the truck, which had just passed inspection, clean as a whistle. A neighbor down the block, a quiet guy named Jeff, stopped me one afternoon while I was trimming the hedge. "You know she's got it out for you, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I got that impression. She called the city on me last year because my Halloween pumpkins were decomposing in public view." October 29th. We both laughed. "She ever follow through with anything?" Jeff shook his head. "Only if she thinks you're weak. She pushes and waits to see who pushes back." He paused, looked at me. "You're not going to push back, are you?" I just smiled. "I'm not going to shout. That's not my style." He gave me a knowing nod. "Good. She hates quiet people. Scares her." Then came the vandalism. It was small at first. A scratch along the passenger door. Then a cracked taillight, as if someone had accidentally backed into the truck and fled. I filed both incidents with local law enforcement. Not because I expected justice, but because I needed the paper trail. One officer asked if I had enemies. I said no, but I might have a neighbor with too much time and a clipboard. They chuckled, but they also nodded. It was a Thursday when I saw the first real sign that Karen wasn't just doing this out of obsession. She was doing out of power. I received a letter, not from her, but from a local towing company. It was a preemptive notice of possible removal, citing a third-party complaint about an abandoned or unregistered vehicle. I checked the number, called it. A man answered. "Did someone contact you about my truck?" I asked. "Yeah, some HOA rep. Said it was a non-resident vehicle. Asked if we'd be available for a potential removal order if it became necessary." "Did she give a name?" Pause. "Karen something. Westbrook." That confirmed it. She was laying the groundwork. She was trying to build a case from the outside in, hoping to wear me down before she struck. I spent that weekend installing a second camera, this one aimed at the sidewalk and street in front of the house. It captured foot traffic, vehicles, and, most importantly, Karen's daily morning circuit. It also caught something else. HOA board member Dolores standing next to her one morning, both women pointing toward my truck, nodding seriously like 2 generals planning an airstrike. But the final straw wasn't something they did to the truck. It was something they did to my mail. One morning, I opened the mailbox to find a letter torn in half. It was a VA appointment notice, one I'd been expecting. The return address was clear. The date was correct. But the envelope had been ripped open, then resealed with tape, poorly, like a rushed job. The appointment date had passed. And that's when something broke inside me, not in a way that made me lose control, but in a way that sharpened my focus. This wasn't about a vehicle anymore. This was about a line that had been crossed. These people had invaded my peace, tampered with my dignity, and disrupted what was supposed to be a quiet chapter in a life that had already seen enough turbulence. I made 3 copies of everything. Printed photos, burned footage to a USB drive, labeled each folder in bold letters. Harassment, OSH, HOA, 2025. And then I made one more call to a contact from the state office I hadn't spoken to in over a year. A supervisor, someone who owed me a favor. We didn't speak long, just long enough. When I hung up, I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked out to the truck, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. I looked at the house across the street, Karen's fortress of petunias and passive aggression. She had no idea the storm that was coming. Because I wasn't just a man with a truck. I was a man with the truth, and now I had everything I needed to prove it. There's a quiet kind of rage that lives just below the surface when you know someone is testing your patience for sport. It's not the kind that explodes in screaming matches or door slams. It's colder, slower, like pressure building behind a dam. And on the morning of May 3rd, when I walked outside to see a tow truck idling at the curb, diesel engine humming, amber lights spinning, and Karen standing beside it in full HOA regalia, I knew the dam was about to break. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy talking to the driver, a stocky man in sunglasses who looked more annoyed than interested. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the red Dodge Ram in my driveway, like it was a hot potato he didn't want to touch. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I stepped off my porch like I had all the time in the world, coffee in hand, still in my worn-in boots and denim shirt from the morning's yard work. I walked slowly, deliberately, and by the time she noticed me, the look of control on her face flickered just enough to betray what this really was. A power play. "Oh," she said too brightly. "Mr. Cole, good morning. We were just talking about towing my truck off my property." I finished. Her smile faltered. "We've received multiple complaints. As per Article 6.4b of the Community Standards, vehicles that are not garaged and appear abandoned are subject to HOA intervention. This truck has been cleared by local law enforcement. Twice," I said, "and it's not abandoned. I drove it yesterday." The tow driver raised his hands. "Look, I was just told to come out and take a look. No paperwork. I'm not touching anything without legal authorization." Karen shot him a look that could have curdled milk. I turned my attention to her. "Did you file this request with the city?" "There's no need to get them involved," she said smoothly. "The HOA has its own procedures, which don't override municipal law," I said. And just like that, the game shifted. For the first time, she looked rattled. "This is a community matter," she insisted. "We have standards." "No," I said. "You have a vendetta." The tow truck pulled away 5 minutes later, empty. Karen didn't say goodbye. She walked stiffly across the street, disappearing behind her pristine white door with shutters that never closed. I went inside and opened a file I'd been updating for weeks. I added a new entry. May 3rd, attempted unauthorized towing without due process. I attached screenshots from the porch camera. Time-stamped. Tagged. That was the moment I knew I couldn't wait anymore. Karen had crossed from nuisance into something closer to obsession. And when obsessed people don't get their way, they push harder. They get creative. And that's exactly what she did. 2 days later, a uniformed city inspector knocked on my door. He was polite, young, carried a clipboard, and wore a patch I didn't recognize, code enforcement, but from a different district. He looked mildly embarrassed. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "We received a report of an unlicensed vehicle and potential zoning noncompliance." I raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" He hesitated. "Anonymous tip. We have to check them all." I invited him in, showed him the registration, walked him around the property. I even offered to show him the paperwork proving my residence and veteran status. "You're all good," he said, scribbling a quick note. "Honestly, this looks like, well, someone with a grudge. You're not the first person to tell me that." He left, and I added another entry to the file. The next letter was different. Not a citation, not a complaint. It was a cease and desist. Typed on HOA letterhead, signed with Karen's looping signature, it claimed I'd been harassing a board member, creating a hostile environment, and attempting to interfere with official HOA operations. It was laughable, until I realized the game she was playing. She was trying to flip the narrative, make me look like the aggressor, paint herself as the victim. But she had one major problem. She underestimated me. That same day, I drove down to the county office. I filed a formal complaint for HOA misconduct. I submitted video footage, printed emails, eyewitness statement from 2 neighbors who had seen Karen tampering with my mailbox and placing notes on my vehicle. I filed a second report with the city's Neighborhood Legal Services Bureau. I handed them the cease and desist letter and explained, in very clear legal terms, how it constituted retaliatory action following my documentation of harassment. I left nothing to chance. And just for good measure, I sent copies to a journalist friend I knew from my previous work in enforcement, just in case this ever needed to go public. Then I waited, not passively, but quietly. I mowed my lawn, washed the truck, grilled on Sundays. I nodded to neighbors, kept to myself. The cameras kept rolling. The file kept growing. And for 10 days, there was silence. Until one morning, I looked out the window and saw 3 unmarked vehicles parked outside Karen's house. 2 men in black suits stood on her porch. A third stood behind them, arms crossed. Karen opened the door, visible through the blinds. Her face was pale. Her mouth moved, hands gesturing, pointing toward my house. The agents didn't follow her gaze. They handed her something, a thick envelope. Then they left. Karen didn't come out for the rest of the day. Later that week, I received a letter. Not from Karen, from the city. An official response to my complaint. It stated that multiple violations had been substantiated against the Oaks Summit Hills HOA, including unauthorized citations, misuse of power, and false reporting to municipal departments. The HOA would be subjected to a formal audit. Leadership would be temporarily suspended pending review. Karen was, in so many words, out. She hadn't just crossed the line, she had burned the bridge behind her. And I was the one holding the matchbook. The first sign of real change came not with another knock, but with a letter. This time, it wasn't a complaint, a fine, or a false violation notice. It was a formal notification, typed in clean government formatting and stamped with a city seal. The kind of letter people read once and feel their stomach drop. It was addressed to Karen Westbrook, and it was taped to her front door early one morning by a city official in a gray windbreaker. I saw it happen through my kitchen window. I was drinking coffee again, calm, quiet, and watched as the official parked across the street, walked with purpose, and posted the letter without a word. Karen opened the door minutes later. She saw it. She pulled it down, read it on the porch, and froze. I couldn't read her face, not exactly, but I knew what it looked like. Shock, maybe a little fear. The same expression people wear when they realize their power has limits. The HOA board was being audited. A temporary freeze was placed on all citations, fines, and enforcement actions pending investigation. Several complaints, including mine, had been verified. The city was stepping in. Karen had pushed too hard, and now the wall had pushed back. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes ripple through the neighborhood. People who used to avoid eye contact started nodding when I walked by. One man, older, bald, always sweeping his porch, raised a hand in greeting. A woman down the street even stopped me near the mailbox. "You're the guy with the truck, right?" she said. I nodded. "Good for you. We've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her." Apparently, Karen's campaign of HOA terror wasn't limited to me. I heard stories of Halloween decorations being removed without notice, holiday lights threatened with fines, even backyard gardens flagged for being unsightly. She had ruled by fear, wielding bylaws like a sword. And now, that sword had been taken from her. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one was from the interim board member the city had assigned, an older woman named Cheryl who had once served on the planning committee. The letter explained that the board would be restructured and that Karen was suspended from her position pending the outcome of the investigation. It was official. Karen was out. You might think I celebrated, that I popped a bottle, made a toast, or stood on my porch and shouted victory. I didn't, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. I just wanted to live in peace, to honor my brother's memory in his home, to park his truck without being treated like a criminal, to tend to my yard, wave to my neighbors, and exist without harassment. Karen had made that impossible, and now She was facing the consequences of her own actions. About a week later, I saw her again. She was walking her little dog, same red leash, same lavender windbreaker, but she didn't cross in front of my house. She stayed on the far side of the street, eyes down, face tight. She walked quickly, quietly, like someone who had finally understood that the neighborhood was no longer her stage. She didn't wave. I didn't either. The camera stayed up. The file stayed saved. Not because I expected more trouble, but because I had learned something important. People like Karen never really go away. They retreat, regroup, and sometimes return in different forms. But now I had my protection, not just in evidence, but in community, because I wasn't the only one who'd had enough. Now, others have found their voice too. And sometimes that's how change really happens. Not with a bang, but with a quiet decision to say enough. It's strange how a neighborhood can feel like a battlefield one month and a sanctuary the next. I didn't realize how much tension I'd been carrying until it was gone. Like air finally returning to your lungs after holding it underwater for far too long. The fights, the fines, the 7 a.m. snapshots of my truck. Those things that fill my days, colored every morning with a hint of dread. And then, slowly they stopped. Karen was out. And peace, the kind that comes not from isolation, but from justice, began to settle over Oak Summit Hills. It began with the small things. A neighbor who had once rushed her trash bins out of sight the moment pickup ended now left them by the curb for a full hour, unbothered, unpunished. A family 2 houses down strung up string lights for a birthday party, something Karen would have called visual clutter. This time, no warning letters appeared. But more than any visual sign, it was the shift in energy that spoke loudest. People lingered outside longer. Kids played stickball in the cul-de-sac on a Wednesday afternoon. Neighbors nodded at each other not just out of habit, but with a kind of renewed solidarity, like survivors of a strange suburban siege who'd finally seen the last helicopter lift off. And as for me, I slept better. The kind of sleep that goes deep, where the muscles in your jaw unclench and the dreams don't involve paperwork, phone cameras, or confrontations across a driveway. One particular morning stood out to me. I was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, barefoot, still wearing the flannel shirt I'd come to think of as my armor during the Karen episodes. Outside, the street was quiet except for birdsong and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was the kind of stillness I hadn't felt since moving back into my brother's house. And then I heard a knock. Not on the door, on the window. I turned to see Jeff, my neighbor, the same guy who had warned me about Karen's pumpkin citation, standing on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, grinning like a man who finally had a reason to smile. "You busy?" he called through the screen. "Only if napping counts," I said, opening the door. He stepped inside, nodding approvingly. "Heard the board met last night." "They did." He nodded. "Karen's officially removed. Not just suspended. Gone. Cheryl's in charge full-time until elections next spring." I blinked. "That's fast." "Apparently, the audit uncovered some stuff," he said, lowering his voice. "Falsified fines, misuse of HOA funds, and a couple of emails where she suggested using neighbor pressure to drive certain residents out. Your case tipped the scale." I didn't say anything right away. Just let the words sink in. It was over. Really over. That night, I pulled out the old manila folder one last time. The evidence. The photos. The printed emails and timestamps. The recordings of her voice floating through morning air as she snapped pictures of my truck. I flipped through each piece slowly. Not out of vengeance, but reflection. These weren't just artifacts of conflict. They were reminders of how quickly people can let power cloud their judgment. How petty rules, when enforced without grace, can destroy community instead of protect it. I sealed the folder, labeled it Resolved 2025, and tucked it away in the file cabinet beside my brother's old Navy medals. Some things deserve to be kept, not as weapons, but as memories. I started seeing Karen less and less. She still lived there, technically, but her routines had changed. No more HOA hat. No more daily walks at dawn. Her little white dog still trotted along the edge of the grass, but now on a shorter leash, a quicker loop. She stopped looking people in the eye. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the voicemail she left after the police visit. The one where she spoke of misunderstandings and private resolutions, not once acknowledging what she had put me through. She hadn't learned. She'd just been caught. A few days later, Cheryl stopped by. She was carrying a clipboard, but it wasn't for fines. Just some papers from the interim board, surveying residents about future priorities, community improvements, and ways to bring the neighborhood together after, as she put it gently, a period of overreach. "I want to build something new," she said, looking around at my garden, the porch rail I just painted. "Something rooted in actual community." "I like that," I said. "You be good on the board," she added. I laughed. "I think I filled my HOA quota for the year." She nodded. "If you ever change your mind." She left the papers, smiled, and walked back across the street. I didn't sign up for anything that day, but I read every word, because for the first time, the HOA wasn't a threat. It was a chance. Fall came early that year. Cooler breezes, leaves crunching underfoot. The kind of weather that makes you nostalgic for front porches, worn sweaters, and quiet evenings with nothing but the sound of a dog barking 2 blocks away. I sat out on the porch more. The truck stayed parked where it belonged. No citations appeared. No one called the city. And slowly, I began to let go. Not of the past, but of the tension it left behind. One morning, I found a folded note on my front step. At first, my heart jumped. Old habits. But it wasn't typed. It wasn't signed with a K. It was handwritten, shaky cursive. It read, "Thank you for standing up. We didn't know we could too. Lot 18. That was the brown house down the block. I'd never met them. But now, we were neighbors in the truest sense of the word. You don't move into a home expecting a war. You don't buy a truck expecting it to become the center of a standoff. But sometimes, peace isn't handed to you. Sometimes, it's earned. Sometimes, it begins when someone says, no more." The sun set over Oak Summit Hills that night in gold and quiet pinks. Porch lights flicked on. Somewhere, someone grilled something that smelled like steak. Wind rustled through freshly swept sidewalks. And I sat there, coffee in hand, watching all, grateful, grounded, and finally at peace.